Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The subject of this video is to begin to analyze how markets function. And we all know markets are the interaction of these two groups, the relevant buyers of a particular product or service or whatever the case, or resource for that matter, and the particular relevant sellers, the people who are likely to interact in providing the good and in purchasing the good. And this is the first of three videos which will cover the market process. So we had reviewed the circular flow model, and we noted that it is a model of economic competition. Remember, we talked about the different ways people compete: violence, social, political, and finally economic. And we noted that in economic competition, in order to get things, you produce value for others. And the more value you can produce, the more goods you can acquire through the exchange system. We also noted that, in that system of exchange, the goods end up or are allocated to the people who value them the most. Now remember, when economists talk about value, they're talking about economic value, and that's based on your ability and willingness to acquire goods with the use of money which you've earned by producing value for others. And so within that construct of definitions, markets move goods to where they're most valued, and the only people that get them are those that are willing, in fact, to pay. Interesting example of what's taking place in Florida. They had a tremendous shortage of gasoline because of the difficulty. Number one, the local refineries shut down, which had been the major source of that. And then they couldn't bring stuff in over the ocean, and so they were limited to bringing down these big tanker trucks with 1 million gallons in them to try to get gas down to particularly the southern area in Florida, so people could escape and get out. And some of the stations were raising their prices, and the one price that I saw was $8.50 a gallon or something along that nature. And the first response of the public is to say, well, that's awful. That's called price gouging, and you're taking advantage of people, and you shouldn't do that. But stop and think about it. If it's $8 if it's $2.50 a gallon, and they ask you, don't take more than what you need, right? We're trying to get it to the people who value it the most. If it's only $2 a gallon, you're going to fill up, right? Because you don't know when you're going to get gas again. Everybody with me? At $2 a gallon, your incentive is to fill the tank, because I don't know what's going to happen or what I'm going to be. If I raise the price to $8, then people will consider, do I really need the gas that much? And you'll see fewer people purchasing it or purchasing smaller amounts because the price is up from what you expect it to be in 3 weeks' time or whatever. So allowing prices to go up during catastrophes actually helps out in the allocation of the goods to the people who value them the most.
Don't you think in like a dire situation like that, everyone feels like they value it?
Everybody values it, but you'll still get a differential. I mean, maybe if it's not at $8, it's at $15. If it's not there, it's at $25. The example I like to give is this. During the earthquake here in January 17th at 4:21 a.m., the Northridge quake, and I know that because my clock stopped. I was a mile and a half from the epicenter, so
What year was this again?
it was 93 or 94. 94, right. What things become really valuable? Well, number one, water does, right? Because, it's hard to get water. And the tap water may be contaminated, although it turned out it wasn't. And then batteries, because you want to be able to see things. 7-Eleven carries batteries, and there's a standard price, like you get a 2-pack, and I always buy them on Amazon, 100-pack or something. But I think like two D cells would be $2 or something. Is that about something in that range, right? Good. So you're out of batteries, and you go in the morning, and you want to get batteries for your flashlight, and you don't know how long you'll be out of power, and so you get 4 batteries because you may use the thing a lot and so forth. And so by 9 o'clock they're sold out because they base their inventory decision on the normal rate of sales in non-emergency situations. 4 o'clock that afternoon, what is your name? Marie has a little 6-month-old girl, and Marie couldn't get to 7-Eleven in the morning. She gets there at 4 o'clock, and there's no batteries left. Now you're really desperate because there's no lights in the house. You don't have any candles, or only the birthday candles, which won't last very long. And you would really want to have a battery, right? Good. So we can see the mistaken allocation. The first person buys the second 2 batteries as a backup in case they need them. And here's somebody who really would value it greatly to have it. So if you allowed them to raise price during these kinds of situations, 7-Eleven would be willing to stock a larger inventory of batteries, understanding that it's costly to do, right? If I don't sell them before the bad time, then they have a shelf life and they go bad. So there's a storage cost of having things stored in the store. But if I knew I was able to raise the price during a time when they are much more valuable, then I'd be willing to supply more of them. My son was up in Santa Barbara, and he and I talked, and he was going to get a truck and go to Costco and just fill up the whole truck with water, and then bring it down and then sell it in the various neighborhoods. Now, in order to do that, number one, obviously you have to cover the price of the water at Costco. We're all out of water in LA by that time. And then you have to cover the cost of getting it down here and then distributing it and so forth. But it's very, very valuable to people. But they decided not to do it because people respond by saying, you're ripping me off, right? You're trying to take advantage of me. But if you allowed that to happen, then much more water would have come into LA. I actually had a large stock of water in the garage because at that time you could buy the box from Costco that had 2 of the big containers. What are they, 5-gallon? You know what I mean, the big Arrowhead. And you used to be able to buy them by the box for 2 of them. So I had about 8 boxes stacked up in the garage. And during the week, I gave water to some of my neighbors, but I was careful not to open the garage and have people see that I had all that in there, because then there are problems that in fact occur. And I don't know why I'm talking about this. But basically, if you allow prices to rise, there's a benefit to doing that. Okay, good. So the economic form of competition, as we said, is where I produce value for others and I acquire that, use that to buy the goods and services that I want. The circular flow model we've talked about, and you all have seen ad nauseum, basically lays out the system, the simplified system of exchange. Households own most of the resources. They rent those to business firms through what are called factor markets or resource markets, and they receive a flow of income. And remember, the resources are not just labor for which we receive wages, but it's also the use of land or the use of capital equipment are also owned, often through financial intermediaries, but they're owned by people. And so they are also sold to the firms or provided to the firms through factor markets. Firms have to decide what combination of inputs to use. And there are always many, many ways to do anything. They have to decide what combination will produce the quality that I want at the lowest possible cost. And so that's that set of decisions firms are in fact making. The other set of decisions firms make is what to produce, what goods and services to produce and sell. And I guarantee you right now there are tens of thousands of meetings all over the world where people within firms are coming together and discussing what should we put in the product, what things should we include in the product. You're an accounting firm, well, we specialize in tax. Well, should we expand that because a lot of our tax customers also want to know about international exchange rates? Should we offer that service? Should we have them come to us or send our representatives out to them? All these kinds of decisions are being made within firms to try to maximize profit, to try and minimize the cost and maximize the value of what is being sold. 2/3 of goods and services, as we talked about, are purchased by U.S. households. About 70% of U.S. production is repurchased by U.S. households. The United States economy is very much a consumer-driven economy. The rate of growth is determined by the dollar votes that people cast for the various goods and services that are possible to in fact be produced. And again we exchange dollars back to the firm to acquire those goods and services. That flow is called revenue. And I've added credit markets, which are not in many of the texts presentation of this, because there's a third set of markets, and that is the movement of the use of money over time, the trading of the use of money over time. As a household, the two times you go in to acquire cash are normally the purchase of a mortgage or the purchase of a car. Those are the two big things that households borrow money in order to acquire. They're willing to pay a premium, which is the interest rate, to get the goods sooner. You could save up to $30,000, right, over 6 years, and then buy the car, but you want the car now. So you're willing to pay a premium, and right now, the way the economy's been in your historical transactional history, interest rates are extremely low, and so it's more tempting to do that. Business firms tend to want to use money, to take money out of the credit markets earlier on in their production process in order to finance their operations. And so if you're starting out in a business, you have all these expenses at the beginning before any revenue comes in. And particularly the more research and development that's necessary to build the product, the more that is the case. So firms want to acquire the use of money sooner so that they can buy the buildings and buy the equipment and hire the people and buy the raw material and then begin the manufacturing or creation and then repay it from the revenue stream that comes in over time. So firms tend to be borrowing in the market early in their cycle and repaying over time. Households tend to be putting in through pensions and purchase of financial assets like stocks and bonds and things like that. And then drawing out at the end of their period. And then the two assumptions are that households are trying to maximize utility in their decisions. Decision number one, who will I work for? Who will I sell my resources to? And decision two, what combination of goods and services will I buy? And that often is a topic of discussion between families, particularly men and women. Men tend to want to buy things now, and women tend to have a stronger sense of budgeting over time. It probably is part of the maternal instinct to recognize you have to take care of the family and you have to be safe in the future. And we have kids growing up. We want them to have an education, and the guys are like, I'm going to buy a BMW. So there's often discussions of that nature, and then also discussions about whether to take that income and spend it on anything today or to put it into credit markets for the future. Firms are assumed to try and maximize economic profit. Profit, as you know, is the flow of total revenue coming into the firm, as indicated by the diagram, minus the total economic cost. And make a note in your notes. When you talk about economic profit, you're talking about economic costs, not accounting costs, in calculating economic profit. We'll see that economic profit is like a special profit because it's above and beyond the normal rate of return for the various factors that are being used in production. Markets, as we said, are the interaction of the relevant buyers and sellers. And money plays a key role in servicing these transactions. Initially on the internet, as you may know or you may recall, people were reticent to buy over the internet because you had to give a credit card number or a bank account number or something like that. And PayPal came up as a service that offered you the insurance that the merchant would not receive your credit information. They acted as a go-between in purchases in that way, and that reduced the transactions cost of using that. And today there are many, many ways of using intermediary things as a medium of exchange. Bitcoins arose as a method of a new currency that is called a blockchain, and each transaction is recorded in this master set of data, and you can earn bitcoins by solving more and more complex equations. And the guy who initially started it had in mind a total number that could be reached. And what's fascinating is that and the Bitcoin blockchain is a way of certifying the quality of each transaction. And what's fascinating is that the blockchain method is now being used by banks for various kinds of financial transactions. It's also being used for some of the investment facilities as a means of certifying the quality of the data that's being talked about. There's articles about the future of the internet may be based on blockchain transactions, and that would again be a way of certifying and you can also tell if somebody has seen the transaction, and that's the application of physics, of a branch of physics, which I'll remember on the way home. Good. So scarcity means we know what it is. It means we don't have enough to do all the things we'd like to do. And it implies that every society has to find a method to solve these various questions. Number one, you have to have a mechanism that determines which goods will be produced, what goods will in fact be produced. And the goal would be to maximize the value to society of whatever mixture of goods and services that you choose to produce. I've mentioned the Soviet Union as a totalitarian form of governance, and in that case the central government decided everything. They decided how many bombers, how many submarines, how many Olympic athletes would be produced by society, and then a very limited amount of goods being produced for consumption by the population. In the Soviet Union, alcoholism was rampant because the firms were not maximizing profit. People would get a job as an engineer, and then they would go in and show up the first couple days, and then they might not show up, kind of go in and not show up and drink alcohol because they had lots of rubles left over because you couldn't buy anything. There just weren't enough consumer goods, in fact, to purchase. So that was part of why that form of government eventually fell apart, was because they were making decisions to put it into international competition, particularly warlike competition, whereas the society itself was starved of the ability to do that. France has a socialistic form of competition. They have more of a market system, but even there are a lot of rules that are made by the central government that restrict the kinds of competition or the kinds of exchange that are allowed in society. Secondly, every society has to answer this question: how to produce? What combination of resources will we use? You may know, and you've probably read, that there's tremendous discussion about moving to green power all over the world, moving to solar power, moving to wind power, and geothermal, and then there's some consideration of bringing nuclear back, which is an extremely efficient form of generation of electricity. But there are all the there are all these goals that they have. I just read yesterday about in The Economist about Germany. Germany is well ahead in using sustainable power, and their goal is to increase that by 2024 to some percentage. And France has a goal, and so all those societies are not just using market signals to determine what to produce, but putting into place political decisions that they want to encourage certain kinds of production and discourage other kinds of consumption, right? That of oil and coal, etc. And then for whom to produce means you have to decide how to distribute the goods. And as I said, the market distributes them to those who have the economic power to acquire them. Even in the United States, as you know, though, there are lots of subsidies given to various groups of people and various firms to affect what is in fact produced and then how it is in fact distributed. We have an earned income tax credit for people who are working but making a very small amount. They actually can file for taxes and get money from the government to subsidize them. So we have some government programs that help to determine who will in fact receive the goods. So the study of markets is the study of these two interacting groups, buyers and sellers. The way we go about, and some markets are obviously local, some markets are international. Your name is?
Alex.
Alex?
Yeah.
If you were running a Domino's Pizza at the corner of Nordhoff and Reseda, isn't that yeah, Nordhoff and Reseda, how far out would you estimate is the market for your pizzas?
A mile and a half.
Mile and a half, might be a little more than that. It's usually thought of as about 5 miles, but it's only that far. And we'd say, well, are you advertising in East LA? And you say no, because that's not part of my relevant market. Good. What would you guess is the relevant market for Honda Motor Corporation of Japan? Worldwide. Good. And so we'd be interested in what are the factors that determine how large is the geographic market. And part of it is the cost of transportation relative to the value of the good. The cost of transportation as a percentage of the value of the good. The pizza's worth about $10. So people are only willing to invest a certain amount to go and get it. Plus, the second factor is the location of substitute products. If there's another Domino's 6 miles away, your market only goes out 3 miles, basically. Good. You can ship automobiles on contract for $250 anywhere in the world. These major manufacturers of automobiles and trucks can ship those all over the place very, very cheaply. So to study the market, we build two separate models. We focus on buyers as a group, and we develop all the factors that influence what they buy, all the different things that would have an effect that when they change might change what it is that the buyers buy. Then we look at sellers separately, and we build a whole model of all the things that influence their willingness to produce and sell. And then finally, we bring those two models together, overlaying demand and supply, and we look at what we could predict about the interaction of the two groups and about the rate of exchange and about the determination of prices in the marketplace. All along, we employ this assumption of what is called ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus literally means all other things held equal. If you want to impress somebody that you have a science, you have to have some Latin terminology to throw around to impress them, right? You have to be able to say, well, you know, that's true, ceteris paribus, and oh, right, ceteris paribus, right? Well, it means that as we build the model, we're looking at one thing at a time, one thing at a time. So if I say this is a normal good and income goes up, demand would tend to increase. Well, that's assuming nothing else is changing, right? You're isolating each factor by itself and looking at the effect of that factor, and then the reality is the sum of all those things interacting. But the method is holding other things constant. Now, we know that marginal value, which is also called the reservation price, is defined as the most dollars you are willing and able to spend to acquire one more unit of the good. Notice the word at the top is marginal, so we're interested in, for each additional item, what's the most you'd be willing to spend, willing and able to spend to acquire that, and that is called marginal value. It's also called reservation price, which means it's the price above which you would not purchase the item. So it's the most you'd be willing to pay to acquire something. If pizzas sell for $10, the only way you would acquire a pizza is if you value it at $10 or greater. Everybody with me? The only time you make a purchase is when marginal value is greater than or equal to price. So we want to think first about marginal value. What kinds of characteristics can we assume are true, and then from that build the demand function, which traces out the amounts you're willing to buy at. So as I said, plotting marginal value, the marginal value declines for all goods. Now, stop and think. If I'm saying that for all goods, it has to apply to non-material goods too, those other things that you get benefits from. So think about time spent with a loved one in a mature relationship. A new relationship, marginal value changes because you're developing the relationship. But in a mature relationship between you and other people, does marginal value decline with time spent with that individual? And I would suggest yes. Aunt Linda's coming for Thanksgiving. You haven't seen her in 2 years. She's your favorite aunt. She used to send you lots of presents and stuff. So you're really excited to see her. And that first day is fantastic, right? Gets off the plane. And now, by the way, you're allowed to go through security so you can meet her at the gate in some of the airports in Tennessee and eventually elsewhere. But anyway, she comes in, you're really excited. The first couple hours are great, and then the next day is great, and you have to go shopping and have lunch. And then she stays for a third day, a fourth day, a sixth day. What's happening to marginal value? It's possible for it to become negative, right? Like, God, when is she? I can't remember. I forgot how much I hate her laugh. It just drives me crazy. Good. So marginal value declines. That's the assumption of economists, no matter what the good is. The second tennis racket is not worth as much as the first tennis racket in terms of personal value. We plot it as a graph, so we plot it visually as a graph. We then simplify it by drawing it as a straight line graph, but that is only to simplify the presentation. We are not assuming that marginal value declines in a linear manner. We're not assuming that each additional unit has the same decrease in marginal value as the previous one, only that it is a downward sloping function. It is a downward sloping function. The data is the height of the curve. So when you see this line, which becomes the demand curve, the data you're reading is the height of the function above each unit is the marginal value of that additional unit. So looking at this, the marginal value of the first unit is what? $10. Marginal value of the 10th unit is $1. Good. And all along is the data set. And you can present it as a graph or in a table in that way. So we said I'd only buy something if I value it greater than or equal to price. So each of us makes that comparison as we look at goods that are potentially available for purchase. Do I value it more than the price? I suspect, or at least equal to the price. I suspect you're like I am. If you walk down the center of the Northridge Fashion Center and you look inside these glass enclosures, there's all this stuff that's in there. And a lot of it I don't want, right? Everybody with me? A lot of it I wouldn't even want to have, right? So our marginal values differ depending on our taste and preference and our abilities and all those kinds of things. Good. So we can derive the demand schedule as a schedule of the quantities that the individual is both willing and able to purchase at each alternative price. Remember that demand is not an amount. Demand is a schedule of different quantities at different prices. Demand is the whole curve. It's a whole data set. If the price is this, then the quantity demanded is in fact this. Because you're comparing price with marginal value, we draw the marginal value function, and then we make that comparison. If the price per unit is 8, would you buy the first unit? Come on, guys, what's the first unit worth? 10. You can buy it for 8, yes? Second unit. Yeah, 9's greater than 8. Third unit. Yeah, on the margin, 8 equals 8, right? Would you buy a fourth unit? Do you want a fourth unit? Excellent, excellent, very good. You do, because you'd be willing to buy it if the price was 7, right? But at a price of $8, the only units you would buy are the ones where marginal value is greater than or equal to price. If the market comes out and presents you with a price of $5, then you'd compare it with your marginal value function. You'd be willing to buy additional units. And if the price were only $2, then you'd trace out to the demand and you'd be willing to buy 9 units. So demand is this data set, the distance to the function at each particular price. once again, well, let me go and I'll come back to it. So we read it horizontally as a data set. Because marginal value declines, the first relationship or characteristic of demand, which is called the first law of demand, says that at higher prices the quantity demanded is smaller, and at lower prices the quantity demanded is larger. So the quantity demanded increases as the price falls, which means it's an inverse or negative relationship. Now, looking back at this demand function, this is where people who don't understand economics get confused. It looks like what you're saying here is that, let's say the price is $5, so you're currently buying, I think, 6 units. The way it's drawn, it looks like if the price goes up to $5.10, then the quantity demanded gets smaller. You guys with me? For every incremental increase in price, the quantity is getting smaller as we go along. And so people who don't understand economics will complain about its veracity by saying, you know, you economists assume that people, when they walk in the grocery store, know every relative price in there. They immediately know costlessly anything that has changed in price. And if Heinz ketchup goes up by 10 cents, that night you'll put a little bit less ketchup on your French fries. That's ridiculous. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. We don't assume that at all. You guys with me? We don't assume that at all. I assume when you go in the grocery store, you don't even know what most of the products are, let alone what their prices are. And if the price of Heinz ketchup changes by 10 cents, you may not notice it ever, right? Because it's such a small change. The best example is gasoline. And gasoline prices, as you know, are very volatile. They move around a lot. You know, on a $3, a 30-cent change in price is a 10% change in price, right? So gasoline prices vary a lot. They go up and they go down. Do you vary how much you buy according to those changes? Hardly at all. In fact, most of you don't even look at the sign, right? Because you know it's somewhere in the region of what I'm willing to pay, and it's costly for me to come in here, so I just fill up every time, unless it's the end of the month. It used to be, and you're poor, then you can't fill up. But people just fill up all the time. So the quantity demanded. So the first law of demand does not say every time the price changes, the quantity demanded will change. I like to state it a different way, and that is if the price goes up enough, you will in fact cut back the quantity demanded. And if the price falls enough, you will in fact increase the amount you buy. If gasoline gets to $100 a gallon, even Bill Gates will buy less gasoline. You guys with me? For a large enough change in price, no matter how wealthy people are, for a big enough change in price, the quantity will adjust. And a high enough price will lead to a smaller amount being consumed. So that's really what the first law of demand means. It means it's an inverse relationship, and if the price changes enough, people will in fact change the quantity demanded. Notice again that a change in price does not change demand, because demand is already tracing out the different quantities you'd be willing to buy at different prices. So a change in demand leads to a change in quantity demanded. A change in price leads to a change in quantity demanded, not demand. If a change in price moved the demand function, then the original function would be meaningless. If you change price and that caused demand to shift, well, then the original line wouldn't mean anything, right? So a change in price changes the quantity demanded, or it is a movement along the demand function, not a shift of the function. A change in demand would mean the entire function moves, and an increase in demand would mean that at each price, the quantity purchased is larger. Increased demand, notice quantities measured horizontally. So changes in what you're going to buy is a horizontal change in the marketplace. And certain factors will cause your demand to increase, and that isn't a rightward shift. Again, real quickly, just for notational purposes, we draw them as horizontal. They're not necessarily horizontal. Everybody with me? Increased demand could be any kind of it could be a lot down here, a little bit up there. But we draw them as horizontal just to make it simple to look at the changes. So the question is, what factors other than price would cause me to change the amount I buy at each possible price? And I call those the shift factors of demand, because it means as those factors change, the amount you're willing to buy in fact changes. Well, the first is this big category economists call taste and preference. Taste and preference means how much you like the good. Taste, your taste in the good, your preference for the good. Taste and preference. How much you value having this particular good. If your taste and preference increase, then you'd buy more. Demand would increase. If your taste and preference go down, then you'd buy less of it, and so forth. Example is, I like the flavor and the effect of Mondavi's Cabernet Sauvignon. And I might buy at the current price of $18 on sale at Ralph's. I might buy 3 bottles a month. Okay, so my quantity demanded at $18 is 3 bottles per month. Then I meet this young lady who enjoys drinking it with me, and my taste and preference goes up because now I have someone to share it with, and it's even more enjoyable than just drinking alone. Right? Good. And so my taste and preference increases, my demand increases. Now I might buy 5 bottles a month in response to that change in taste and preference. And so that goes on for a period of time, and then she moves to Switzerland. Oh, and she did, and then married a carpenter, which was really stupid. No, this was the most beautiful woman and sensual woman I've ever known in my lifetime. She was a lot of fun. Spoke French beautifully. Anyway.
About 20 bottles after she left?
Well, that's the joke about it. So you'd say, well, she left, so your taste and preference goes down. And then one of my students will always say, well, maybe you drink a lot more now because she's gone, right? And it could be either one of those things. Change in taste and preference means I purchase more. It's a positive relationship. Higher taste and preference, bigger demand, etc. Your taste and preference are also, it is also the category that the economist would include in the following in the analysis of the following situation. In the summertime, your demand for electricity increases because the ambient temperature is higher. You have a stronger demand for air conditioning in your house. Everybody with me? Economists would call that a change in taste and preference. In the wintertime, your demand for electricity goes down, your demand for heating oil goes up. So shifts of that nature would be included in changes in taste and preference. Changes in information will affect taste and preference. Years ago on the Today Show, Katie Couric and Matt Lauer, or whoever it was then, no, it wasn't Matt Lauer, they decided the American people should know how much fat is in Mexican food, right? So they had a table laid out, and they had the enchilada, and then they had tostado, and then they had, tacos and all these different things. And behind each one, they had a tube that was like 2 inches wide, plexiglass going up. And they had this gray liquid in the tube, which represented ounces of fat. Everybody see it, right? So they were walking behind the table saying, now, look at the tostado. It has 8 units of fat, and the enchilada has 20 or whatever it was. But it was just this disgusting presentation. Did you need them to tell you Mexican food has a lot of fat? No, because that's why it tastes so good, right? You all knew that. But anyway, my point is this. The presentation is made. You go to work that day, and at lunchtime, somebody says, let's have Mexican today. What has probably happened to your taste and preference? It's gone down a lot, right? And Mexican restaurants really suffered for about a week after that presentation because of the change in taste and preference based on the visual image of those horrible ounces of fat that you were in fact consuming. You hear a study that comes out that says that Diet Pepsi causes cancer in rats. So you hear it, and it's a scientific study, and say, oh, geez, I better cut back on Diet Pepsi. It turns out that if you really looked into the study, they fed the rats the equivalent of you're drinking 32 cans of Diet Pepsi every day for 21 years. And if you feed the rats anything in that intensity, it will cause cancer. Anything. Broccoli will cause cancer if you feed it to them in that particular quantity. Because the rat just gives up eventually. Like, no, I can't handle it. Good. But changes in knowledge affect your taste and preference. You don't speak French, so the French book is not very valuable, except to say, oh, yeah. But then, if you read French, then it's more valuable. You play a better game of tennis, the tennis racket becomes more valuable. Good. Taste and preference, one of the factors. Secondly, because we're looking at the quantity you're willing and able to buy, the level of income or wealth is your accumulated value of assets, changes in that would change the demand for goods. And in the normal case, it's a positive relationship. And so we call those normal goods. When income rises, people tend to buy more square footage of condoness, more units of quality stereo-ness, more units of attractive clothing, more units of sushi, more units of home-prepared, store-prepared meals for home consumption. Many goods are normal goods. As you have more income, you buy more of those particular factors. So an increase in income would shift demand out. But to be complete, we notice that in some cases, as your income goes up, you buy less of certain goods. And so we define them as being inferior goods. It does not mean low quality. It simply means when income increases, demand for the product decreases, then it is an inferior good. That's the definition of this term.
What would be an example of that?
I'm about to. How many of you are familiar with a product called Hamburger Helper? Good. It's basically powdered fat in a box, right? It is, and you can make the tomato version or the Alfredo version. You mix it with cooked hamburger, and it makes it taste better because fat tastes good. Good. So as a student on your current level of income, you may buy this 3 times a month, right? 3 times a month, and toward the end of the month, right? Good. When you graduate from CSUN and your income goes up to $60,000 a year because you have studied and become an econ major, what will happen to your purchases of Hamburger Helper? They'll go down, right? Because with the higher income, you're now buying more sushi, more other things, and the demand for this would in fact decline. Starbucks coffee, would you guess that is a normal good or an inferior good? It's a normal good. In fact, it's actually called a superior good, which you don't need to know. But it means if income goes up by 10%, the quantity purchased tends to rise by more than 10%. So purchases of Starbucks, these $8 cups of coffee with cream and flavoring and all this kind of stuff, is very, very sensitive to changes in income, and it is a normal good. If you knew that, where would you want to open new Starbucks restaurants? No? Good, because more people. What country?
Western civilization, I would say.
Ones that high income. Ones that are growing.
Which is?
Colombia.
China. And Colombia. So, no. Starbucks knows these factors. They go out and estimate these particular factors. And if you're looking at areas where income is growing rapidly, China's been growing above 10%, except for the last 2 years, a year. At 10% a year, using the rule of 72, their income level doubles every 7.2 years. It doubles every 7.2 years. And then 7.2 years later, it doubles again, which means it quadruples over 15 years. Very high, rapid rate of growth for many of the people in China who have moved into the cities and taken jobs in that particular way. Starbucks currently has 274 outlets in China. There's another 182 that are either in construction or planned to be opened in this next year. When I first heard Starbucks was going to open in China, my first gut level armchair analysis was, that's stupid. That's stupid. Chinese don't drink coffee. They drink what? They drink tea, right? Let me tell you this. If you if you see some major company doing something, it's probably not stupid, right? It's probably not stupid. It turns out there's been a growing change of taste and preference in China for things that are Western, and this is a small thing that you can now afford. And in China, in almost all the outlets, it is a restaurant. There's a maitre d', you go in, you're given a menu, you sit down at tables, the waiter comes or waitress and you order and it's delivered to you at the table. It's a very, very special activity. Once you get, and one of my Chinese students at USC said, not in Shanghai. He said, Shanghai, it's the same as the American model. You go in and give them your name and grab it and go on out. So, but they understand that. Highly responsive to changes in income. What's happened to income in Detroit, particularly starting in 2008? Declined dramatically because of the loss of jobs in automobile manufacturing due to automation, and also this terrible downturn in the real estate market where all these people were broke because they couldn't afford their houses. And sure enough, Starbucks closed multiple locations in Detroit. So knowing whether your demand is highly sensitive to this particular variable is very important in knowing what you're going to do. And this is the kind of stuff about marketing. This is the kind of stuff that marketing people look at and try and estimate. Who is the target market? Are they sensitive to income? Sales of hammers, sales of the tool hammers are not income sensitive at all. You guys with me? They're just not particularly sensitive. Good. The third factor is if I'm going to buy one product, the opportunity cost of doing that is what I could be spending the money on. And so the price of related goods is a change in the price of related goods is going to influence my demand for a particular kind of product. Most alternative goods are substitutes, meaning they are alternative ways of gaining utility. Just within the area of pizzas, you have Little Caesars and Pizza Hut, Domino's, and a whole bunch of other ones. So those are all very close substitute products, and so forth. If Little Caesars lowers their price substantially, what would happen to the demand for Domino's? Probably go down, because now an alternative is cheaper, and so the quantity demanded of that would increase, and the demand for Domino's would decrease. So let's see what the direction is. A rise in the price of the substitute would cause my demand to go up. If the alternative is more expensive, I'd sell more. A fall in the price of a substitute would cause my demand to go down. So it's a positive relationship between my demand function and the price of substitute goods in that particular way. Good. Other goods could also be of the complementary nature, and that is complements are those goods that are used together for a particular activity. Automobiles, gasoline, oil, tires, all of those are complementary products because they're all used together to provide transportation. Playing tennis, tennis courts, tennis rackets, tennis balls, tennis shoes, tennis towels, tennis rosin, tennis hat, tennis shorts, I said, all these things are all complementary products that are used together for the activity of tennis. If tennis balls go up to $50 a can, what will happen to the demand for tennis rackets? It would go down. Everybody with me? The activities become more expensive, you would play less frequently, and consequently the demand for rackets would decline. So it's the opposite to the substitution effect, right? If the price of a complement goes down, then my demand would increase. DVD players and DVDs, good example, right, of complements. DVD players become cheaper, people buy more DVDs. Bacon and eggs, complements or substitutes? Probably complements. They're usually consumed together, although they are alternative forms of protein. And so it's possible if you were doing the Atkins or something like that. But basically, they're complementary products.
Peanut butter and jelly?
That's the one. That's the next. Have you taken my class before? Good. Did you watch the online lecture?
No.
Okay. No, that's a perfect example. They're highly, highly complementary products. 60% of jelly consumption is consumed in combination with peanut butter. So they're very, very strong complementary products. And Smucker's, as you know, makes jellies and jams and so forth. They also bought, not Jif, they also bought a peanut butter company so they can do joint pricing of the two or cross pricing. But years ago, some farmers in Georgia petitioned the United States Congress and they said, listen, peanuts grow in the ground. And Congressman said, okay. And they said, well, somebody's importing peanuts from abroad and we don't know what's in the ground in these countries. I mean, they could be radioactive, they could be oil or poisons and stuff. There ought to be a law to protect American consumers from this simple American food, which is peanuts. And they probably had some data that some bad peanuts had gotten in or something like that. And Congress said, well, yeah, we need to protect the consumers. So they put quota restrictions on the importation of peanuts. What happened to the price of peanuts? Went up. What happened to the sales of Smuckers? Went down, right? Compliments. Good. They were so successful that years later they went back to Congress and they said, you know, peanuts grow in the ground. And the congressman, yeah, we already know that. Well, some people are now planting in the United States on land that's never grown peanuts safely. I mean, look, you know our output. We're a very safe industry. All the peanuts that we grew on this land has been okay. Well, now they're starting to grow peanuts over in Texas next to the an oil refinery. And there ought to be a law protecting the American consumer from these really unsafe peanuts that may in fact be grown. And Congress said, well, yeah, we don't want people to be poisoned. So they passed a law saying that you could only grow peanuts on land that had successfully grown peanuts before. It was a certificate program. You have 5 acres you planted, we give you 5 certificates, right? And that allows you to continue to grow peanuts on those 5 acres. The fascinating thing is, and Congress always has fascinating things they do, at 11:30 at night, somebody added an amendment to say that these certificates are transferable. The certificates can be bought and sold. Now, if that's the case, think about it. Then,
What's the point?
exactly. Then it's meaningless because the whole reason was to make sure it's only grown, but they got it passed through. Some really smart guys in Georgia went around to all these little farmers and they said, you have two certificates, I'll give you $2,000. You can grow tobacco or something else. And you can switch products easily. And here's $2,000 to you. So all these little farmers sold 2 of them here, 5 here, 6, whatever they had, to these large companies, one of whom was owned by Jimmy Carter's family, the past president. And so they got all these certificates, and then they started growing peanuts on these big farms and using, different technologies and so forth and so on. Every year, Smucker's donates money to political campaigns that favor free trade, And if you go on their website, you'll see their explanation, and that is, we started out as a family business, and we believe that families all over the world should have the right to compete fairly and openly in international trade. Now, they're hoping to get enough congressmen to overturn the quotas and allow importation of peanuts. The average size jar of peanut butter sells for approximately 40 cents more than it would if you allowed this importation. So if you could do that, peanut butter prices would come down, demand for Smuckers would go up. Everybody with me? Good. So now you can see how you can use these interrelationships to actually explain things that we see in the real world. Where is it? Good. Changes in expectations about future price of a good will affect demand today. If you think the price is going to go up in the future, what would you do today? Buy more of it. Good. And if you think the price in the future is going to fall, then you might withhold purchase until the price, in fact, comes down. Avocados are relatively expensive now, partly because of this tremendous increase in demand for them. But there are seasonalities of when they come in from Mexico. and in the spring, so it's around March. That's when the crop from Mexico begins to come in the United States, and avocado prices fall. So knowing that, you might say, oh, I'll wait for a week before buying. The category of products that are most affected by changes in expected future price are financial assets. Financial assets such as stocks, bonds, and then lots and lots of other EFTs and all kinds of other financial asset products. If you believe the price of the stock is going to go up in the future, what do? Buy it today in order to take advantage of that price increase. And quarterly, the analysts for each industry publish expectations about the earnings of the firm that will be announced quarterly. And then when the earnings are announced, the price of the stock will adjust depending on whether the earnings are above or below the expectations. Everybody with me? So Apple came out with an increase in earnings, and the price stock fell by 3% because the increase wasn't as big as the analysts thought it was in fact going to be. So changes in future expected price will change your purchases today. Can't do that. Finally, the market demand, the demand for the entire marketplace, is simply the sum of the demand functions of the buyers currently in the marketplace. Market demand is adding horizontally the amounts that each person is willing and able to buy at each particular price. And so it's a summation of those individual demands. And remember, you're adding functions now. You're not just adding, you're adding a whole function to each other. Increase in the number of buyers, then, would increase market demand. About probably 8 years ago, we had a tremendous technological breakthrough in the process of what is called fracking. Fracking's been around for a long time, but this guy in West Texas figured out a new way to do it that was really efficient. And there are large fields of shale oil in North and South Dakota, particularly North Dakota. So all of a sudden, all these guys went up with the rigs and started drilling for the shale oil in North Dakota. Housing prices went through the roof because all these guys had to live somewhere, and the housing that was there was already full of people, right? So housing prices were bid way up. Many of the companies built their own apartment-like complexes to house their own workers. But grocery prices went up, dry cleaning prices went up, movie theater prices went up, because there was this big influx of more buyers in the marketplace. Going back to Detroit, the opposite was the case, as we've talked about. A big exit of people in that area. Prices fell dramatically because there were fewer buyers in the marketplace. Houses were just given up. People just gave up and went away. They owned the house, but it would be reclaimed by the bank because they couldn't pay for it. And then guys went in and just stripped all the copper and all of the things in the houses that could be taken out. And the city of Detroit is now in the process of bulldozing houses, of just taking them down because they can't be occupied, number one, and they have an excess of them. Good. More buyers means bigger demand. Fewer buyers means smaller demand. What was I going to do? Oh, right. On going back for a minute to speculation of changes in expected future price. In fact, it fits in with what we've been watching in Florida with the tropical storms. The best forecasters do not work for the U.S. government. The best forecasters work for private firms, and they work for speculators. As soon as a low pressure forms off the west coast of Africa, it is potentially going to be a hurricane or a tropical storm. And so as that forms, these guys, meteorologists, these guys know probably pretty well where it's going to go because they know the prevailing wind patterns and they have all the data and they probably know where it's going to go. And you guys have been watching. The European model is more accurate, but it's more costly. It only comes out every 12 hours. The American model does a pretty good job, not quite as good as the European, but it uses fewer variables. It's less expensive, and it comes out every 6 hours. So there are all these projections that are made, and these private guys make their own projections. Speculators want to know what's the probability that this is going to become a hurricane and hit Colombia, because Colombia is a major exporter. In fact, coffee is the second highest valued product exported from Colombia that begins with the letter C. It's the second highest value, right? Good. What? So anyway, it's getting closer and closer to Colombia, and so the probability is going to go up and up. The next group of experts they hire are the crop experts. And these are the guys who will tell them if the winds are at these, and it's a probability distribution, if the winds are at these levels, given where we are in the growth cycle of the coffee, we anticipate this much reduction of percentage reduction of the crop. As you know, if the crop is really young, the seeds are right close to the stem, and so a big rainstorm won't have much effect at all. If you're just about to harvest, the coffee beans are hanging down, about to fall off on their own, and then the same winds will cause a much bigger change in them. The third group are economists, and they say to the economist, what is the price elasticity of demand for coffee beans? Because if we know there's a 10%, and it's not just one number, it's a probability distribution. If we have these expectations of probabilities of percentage reduction in quantity, what would be the effect on price? How much would price go up when quantity goes down by this much, which is the application of an elasticity calculation. So this goes on all the time, and the higher the probability, the more coffee futures they will buy. They don't just buy cans of coffee, but they buy futures contracts for coffee beans as they anticipate a future increase in the value that I'll buy them today, and then the value will go up. And if they're correct, then they make money because they bought it today, the price goes up, they're able to sell it at a higher price and be successful in doing that. If you get it wrong, you buy today, causing the current price to go up, and then in the future, the quantity doesn't get smaller, and so then you have to sell it in the future, which increases the future supply, which causes price to fall, and you lose money. Everybody got it? If you're smart and successful at speculation, you make money because you reduce the variation of prices over time, and that is beneficial to society. If you're wrong, then you lose money. So who's going to be speculators in the long run? People who are smart or people who are dumb? People who are smart, because they're going to be rewarded by earning income by making the right calculations. So consequently, we get better and better now at predicting future values because these guys invest in models and algorithms and all kinds of stuff to try and get those estimates as good as they can possibly be. But what's great about it is the market rewards you for being right and punishes you for being wrong. And if you lose all of your family money, right, that you inherited from dad, you won't be around very long as a speculator. And secondly, if you lose other people's money because you were advising them, your reputation is going to go down and you're not going to be around very long doing that. So it's an interesting example, I think, of how speculators actually are always accused of driving up prices. But in fact, speculators reduce the volatility of prices if they are in fact correct over time. Good. That completes our discussion of market demand.